Thank you for giving us an opportunity to update you on exactly as you say. This study and resource we feel does underpin a lot of dermatology research, and it would never have happened without the Psoriasis Association. The Psoriasis Association has a vision in 2011 that they were going to fund this, and really has been so important, the seed funding and then subsequently. So it's a real privilege. And actually, we have the messages today are that whilst we have historically focused on systemic treatments and finessing that, what we want to do going forward is expand the scope of the BSTOP study to all people with psoriasis. And at the end of this, Satveer is going to talk about where you can help us with that, because we really want to engage people with psoriasis with this programme of work. So I'm going to talk now 3 areas: why BSTOP is important, what we found, and I'm only going to give some snippets, but to give you a flavour, and then key to that, where we're going. So why is it important? So if we think about the world of psoriasis, and maybe even the people just in this room and online, we are, of course, all very different. We're different in the way we live our lives. We're different in where we actually live, how we live, but also fundamentally our molecular makeup is different as well. So we are a highly diverse population. The problem is that our current approach to management and treatment pathways are, despite our best efforts, Emma, and you talk about personalising treatment options, they are really very much the same. And drug development is also based on the premise that we're all broadly the same. And therein lies the problem, that we don't have ways of picking out the key different subgroups that there are. And we heard earlier on about disease endotypes and drug endotypes and so on, but they're getting at and trying to unpick those crucial differences that mean that, for example, some person presenting with psoriasis may only have it on their elbow and may never get it anywhere else, whereas another person may progress to get very difficult, severe generalized disease and other problems. So as a consequence of that, we generally intervene with probably not strong enough treatments or effective enough treatments, and often far too late in the treatment course. And so by the time a person accesses therapy that's really effective, they've already suffered a cumulative amount of burden of their disease. And some of that, as Julia says, relates to the way we configure our health service and our pathways. But wouldn't it be marvellous if we knew right much earlier on and stratified the population to say, well, actually, we know you're going to get severe disease. We need to see you immediately. And we know so little, really, about the mechanisms of triggering psoriasis and those mechanisms that drive psoriasis. And actually, you, as the community, also know these things. You also have identified these areas as key research questions that need to be addressed in your psoriasis top 10 research questions. So the overall aim of BSTOP is to better understand psoriasis. And by that, we mean understand mechanisms of triggering the disease, progressing the disease, mechanisms by which drugs work. And through that understanding, we will be able to develop those tools, or as Shana talked earlier, biomarkers that can be used to support clinical care and decision making. And that's where we've been going with the BSTOP. And the study, where we've enrolled people with psoriasis and collected information over time. And a key opportunity and synergy is with BADBIR, which Zenas has talked about. So we have asked people to enroll in BSTOP, and if they're also, then encourage them also to take part in BADBIR, and we link that information. So it enriches all of the other information we're collecting in BSTOP, as well as those samples. And so we have 81 centres across the UK, and to date we've recruited nearly 8,000 people, and that constitutes 6 million clinical data points. So an enormously rich resource over time. We've got 31,000 samples from those patients, generating huge amounts of molecular data that really has allowed us to then leverage additional funds to pay scientists and so on to profile those samples and interrogate that enormously rich resource, which has been underpinned by crucial funding from the Psoriasis Association. As a consequence of that, we've discovered quite a bit. We've got a very strong research output, and we've attracted funds from really, the MRC, NIHR, European commissioning funding. So really an enormous success. And in addition, people around the world realise that this resource is amazing. So we've collaborated with people all over the world, and we've shared data, and that means that, as Zen has pointed out, if you discover something in a research project, you absolutely need to make sure that you can replicate those findings. So we've gone to people in other parts of the world. We found this in our genetic psoriasis. What can you find? Do you find the same thing? So it means that we can be really clear that it's a valid finding. So it really is a success story. And really, in many ways, the best is yet to come, because this is something that grows over time. What have we found? Right. Firstly, we do really understand now a great deal about the genetics, the genes that drive and cause disease. So we know from studies in twins, if you have identical twins, you've clearly got the same genes, non-identical twins don't. And we know from those studies, you can work out the extent to which your genes are driving psoriasis and your environment. And from those estimates, it's been estimated that around just over 60% of your susceptibility to psoriasis is driven by your genetic makeup. Now, it's susceptibility, it's not destiny. What that means is there's also modifiable environmental factors that are leading either to the development of psoriasis and, we believe, also your treatment trajectory. And so understanding the kind of immutable genetics, if you like, is key to understanding disease mechanisms. And that's why so much resource has been expended in this bit and why BSTOP has been so valuable. But of course, people talk about genes, but it's an incredibly complex, noisy area. This is not one single gene causing psoriasis. This is a multiplicity of gene. And we know that there are 3 million pieces of DNA code there. So how do you start unpicking that story? The way you do it is by numbers, large numbers, comparing people with psoriasis and people without and comparing their genetics. And as a consequence of that, we've just run a really very updated study involving BSTOP, which contribute, in fact, a great part with many other investigators around the world. And there are now over 109 areas within the genome that are associated with psoriasis. And that explains nearly 60% of the genetic contribution. So that's an enormous kind of achievement if you think of the complexity. And through that, we've understood the biological pathways that are targetable with these drugs. And all of these new biologics have been driven by really that genetic understanding. So we know if you've got genetic evidence for a pathway, your drug development program is much more likely to be successful. You're much more likely to hit gold. And that's really why we have these incredibly effective drugs now, which at the moment, unfortunately, are limited to too few people. Is the truth of it, too few people. And part of that is cost, but part of it is understanding who really needs those treatment and getting them into the system quickly. Now, how might we do that? Well, HLA, just one example, HLA-CO602 is one of the was the first gene discovered in psoriasis, and it accounts for a very major genetic component. If you carry this gene, you are likely to, it's a strong determinant of your likelihood of developing psoriasis. Now, if you look at psoriasis, we're calling it all the same, but actually it might be a mechanism for one of those so-called disease endotypes. If you look in the skin molecularly, it might separate it out as a potential stratification tool. because we know that HLA-C062 positive people carrying that gene are a bit different to those who aren't. So we've got evidence, again, from BSTOP as well as other studies, that if you're HLA-C062 positive, you're more likely to get guttate psoriasis, earlier onset, Koebner phenomenon, where the psoriasis occurs in a scar. But interestingly, you're more likely to respond to a particular class of biologic, the IL-23s. On the other hand, if you don't carry that allele, you're a bit more likely to have large plaque psoriasis, a bit more likely to be overweight, a bit more likely to have cardiovascular problems, and you're more likely to respond to TNF blockers. So, taking a patient coming into the clinic, if they're HLA-C062 negative, adalimumab is the best drug. 60% chance of being clear or nearly clear. Whereas with Stelara, and perhaps with the P19s, we're exploring this now, you're 30% chance of being clear or nearly clear. So here is a potential tool that might really have clinical utility, a very simple thing. Now, second thing we've been concentrating in BSTOP is how much drug is enough or too much. And this is very simple. It sort of makes sense. There's a dose. Everyone knows whatever drug you're taking, you take the right dose. It's a licensed dose. But in the context of psoriasis, clearly if you don't have enough, psoriasis is not going to clear. You've got the perfect amount, or perhaps you're given too much, which can, apart from the cost, also potentially cause side effects. And in the biologics context, these injection drugs, and of course these principles apply to all therapies, not enough drug is probably an important driver to at least some people who either don't respond or lose their response. And we know with the biologics, these are proteins, foreign proteins the body recognizes as foreign. And your immune system starts working to recognize that and potentially reject it through the so-called anti-drug antibodies. Now, we know that some drugs are more intrinsically immunogenic. In other words, some drugs are more recognizable and more likely to be rejected by the body than others. But we also know that some people's immune system is particularly good at recognizing these foreign biologics. And so this has been, again, funded through SORT, the MRC, and BSTOP. And we've identified genetic susceptibility to developing anti-drug antibodies. So what we found was, is that if a particular area within a gene called HLA-DRB1, in that gene, in people carrying so-called two protective residues, so two particular amino acids, they're much less likely to develop anti-drug antibodies. So taking this into the clinic again, how would this be relevant? Well, if you've got anti-drug antibodies, it binds to the drug and reduces the level of drug circulating and therefore the effectiveness. And so we've combined all of these data to define a therapeutic range for the two most commonly prescribed biologics. So how might this work? Well, in the clinic, this means that rather than having a population-based dosing, all size fits all, we can integrate an individualized dose. So, for example, in our patient, I know a person here, they may be HLA-C062 negative, so you've decided that a TNF antagonist is best. They're carrying the protective residues, so they're not going to develop anti-drug antibodies, and therefore they're going to get persistence from their therapy. And we're going to measure their drug level early on in treatment, because we know drug levels early on in treatment predict your success in 6 months' time. So it's not just telling you the right drug, it tells you whether you're going to be in good shape in 6 months' time hence. So we've introduced this into our clinic with benefit, and it's also integrated into national guidelines. So there, in terms of the research cycle, this is really quite quick. You know, having the resource, the BSTOP resource, where we're really collecting real-world data. So it means also that research findings that we find are really, have got what Zen, I suppose, could call good external validity. In other words, it's generalizable. Where are we going? So I mentioned that we are now, a lot of our work and a lot of the funded work is focused on, has been focused on treatment, but really what we're interested now in is to try and identify those triggers of psoriasis and those factors that drive psoriasis. Why do some people have severe disease and others don't? And that would also help us stratify very early on in the treatment pathway and perhaps introduce treatments much earlier on in order to get people into effective remission. And so this is where we need your help. So Satveer is going to talk to you about our MySkin launch, which is today. Can everybody look on their phones and plug into MySkin? Satveer.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Catherine. So welcome to MySkin. Now, I'm just going to give a bit of background, just picking up from where Catherine's left off. So the key problem here is differences in individuals and in how psoriasis presents and the course that psoriasis takes. So as Catherine's mentioned, our understanding of the fundamental disease has come a long, long way, but we still have a major knowledge gap. And this is, why is it that psoriasis has such a variable course from person to person? So you can see in this individual here, this person's having a gradually progressive disease course over time, with the psoriasis getting gradually worse. In the next person, this individual has a more variable course, so with periods of improvement, then periods of worsening, and repeated over time. And then there's this individual here who, at the onset of their psoriasis, it's much more acute. So suddenly it becomes very worse, and actually it stays that severe over time. So the problem is, when somebody first presents with psoriasis, we don't know which course they're going to take. And wouldn't that knowledge be powerful? Because if we knew the disease course that they had in their future, then we could certainly tailor the support and the care that we give them much more intelligently, more efficiently, and more appropriately to lessen their disease burden and improve the quality of life. We're also increasingly aware that there are a number of factors at play here, and beyond the genetic makeup that we're all born with, as Catherine mentions. So these factors here, stemming from our mental health and our physical health, as well as various other factors such as, say, alcohol intake, smoking, physical activity, it's possible and likely that all of these factors are affecting our psoriasis, and the converse as well. Psoriasis is affecting them. We certainly know that when people are having a bad time with their psoriasis and perhaps having a flare, it has a huge impact on mental health, and also ability to, say, exercise and other impacts on physical health and other health problems that are associated. And another layer of complexity comes with time, of course, because all of these factors are dynamic. Our bodies and our environment are all changing with time, and this adds in another layer to the challenge. So what we want to do with MySkin is try to unpick this and really discover how it is that psoriasis changes over time, and importantly, why. We want to understand this complex relationship between psoriasis and our physical and our mental health, so that we can build a more complete picture which will ultimately help to improve outcomes. And these are some of the outcomes that we hope that we can impact. So move towards being able to prevent disease progression, tailor treatment to each individual so that we can, as we've been talking today, give that right treatment the first time, but also reduce the long-term treatment burden. If we can understand more about somebody's disease course, then perhaps we can understand when to reduce their treatment or even when to stop it. We want to use or try to leverage online tools, and MySkin is exactly that, to track patient-reported progress over time, and check in with you to keep seeing how things are going. And with your information, we hope to enrich existing large-scale data sets. So with BSTOP and the rich genetic data that you can see and the rich immune data that we've collected, we hope that with your information, what we'll be able to glean and gain from that will just be more and more. And finally, to try to better screen and better support for the health conditions that we know are very closely linked to psoriasis. And some of them are mental health, psoriatic arthritis, and obesity, but that's just naming a few. And if we can understand trends in the overall population, then we hope that we can use this knowledge to then help each individual, so that we might be better placed to try to influence this variable and unpredictable disease course for each person. So now it really is over to you, and we need your help to try to unpick this. So MySkin is an online survey. We are asking everybody with psoriasis to complete the MySkin survey. We're launching it today, and if you go to the website myskin.org, it's a 10-minute survey, and we're asking you to enter simple information on your skin, your treatments, and importantly, how you feel. This is the website, and if you click the green button at the top there, it opens up the survey. So the consent form is the first thing that we ask you to fill in, and there's a way to sort of put an electronic signature in. A part of this consent will be asking your permission to link the information that you're giving us through MySkin to data that you may have already contributed to BSTOP, and also data that we have at our fingertips through the electronic health record. So again, the idea is really building up, pulling together all of the bits of information so we can fully appreciate the complexity of disease. The next step is setting a password. You don't have to remember it because it's emailed to your inbox, and that's where it can sit. So when we check in with you again for follow-ups, you can retrieve it from there. And then it's a case of checking through the boxes. And as I say, 10 minutes is the survey. At the end of the survey, you can see we'll be asking you if you're already a participant of BSTOP and any other resources and bad beers there too. And finally, we will be inviting you to provide 3 optional self-taken photographs, and this is optional. And it's 3 photos, one of your worst affected site, chest and abdomen, and legs. And the idea with the photos is that we're really trying to understand how we can use self-taken photographs to better assess psoriasis severity and also ultimately track disease. So we will then be checking in with you every 3 months. We'll send you a little email and text to ask you to fill in a shorter survey, which is really just updates on your psoriasis, your health, and how you're feeling. And the idea is then we really do gain this picture of how psoriasis is changing and how you're feeling over time. At the 1-year point, we'll be giving some personalised feedback, and that particularly pertains to your disease activity based on everything that you have told us over the year. We are very keen to keep everybody updated with all of the findings as they come out. And in particular, on our website, there's a discoveries and publications page where we'll be summarising the data that we collect from everybody and presenting it there. And it's open access. You can go to the website at any time, and we will be updating this as a team very regularly. We also have our social media, so Twitter and Instagram. So please do follow us, because that's another way to stay up to date with our findings. We are incredibly grateful for the support of all of our research partners. This study is funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research, and we are very grateful to the support of the Psoriasis Association. So MySkin has been co-designed with patients, and critical to that has been the Psoriasis Association's input and support, so thank you. So back and over to you. So the website is myskin.org. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to coming back and telling you about everything that we've learned. Thank you.